Hey, how's it going, guys? Chris here. Today we're going to be watching Leave Australia before 2026. ATO is going wild. ATO is coming after everyone's money. It's pretty hard to leave Australia at the moment, like in terms of if you want to move to somewhere that's cheaper and not be taxed as an Australian citizen. It's quite difficult. Australia's got a very intrusive tax system, and let's get into this video.
Imagine this. You've left Australia, moved to Dubai, and think
Why is Dubai such a luxurious place that people want
you're
to go to?
finally free. Until the ATO hits you with a six-figure tax bill after you've left. And this isn't a one-off. It's happening more often, and the new 2026 tax rules could trap thousands of Australians inside the system for years, even after they move abroad. And we've worked with a lot of Australians making this move. And let me be blunt.
Yeah, because Australians are over the cost of living. You can't get anything affordable in Australia anymore. And if you make a crap ton of money, you do get taxed a crap load. So why would you want to live here? I mean, it's safe. I will say that. And like to be honest, would I move away from Australia at the moment? Probably not. Just purely because of family. It's like the only
If you're
reason.
thinking about leaving, this might be your last window to do it properly. The Australian government is rolling out the toughest tax residency laws in history now, and they're not trying to make things clearer. They're trying to lock you in. According to the Australian Treasury's on 2023 consultation paper, the goal is adhesive residency, making it harder to stop being a resident than to start. Trap, and these changes will show you exactly how the bright line test, the 45-day trap, and these changes will impact your exit strategy and why making your move before 2026 might save you hundreds of thousands in taxes. Hit subscribe. This affects every Australian entrepreneur or investor looking to go global, and the window is closing fast. So let me start with the truth about Australian new tax residency rules. The Australian government calls this modernization, but what they're really doing is building a tax prison that's almost impossible to escape from.
Modernization, basically a tax system that will globalize and tax anyone and everywhere,
Right now,
any Australian
under
anyway.
the current system, you can still work your way out of Australian tax residency if you plan this properly. But the Australian tax changes in 2026 will introduce what's called the Australian Bright Line test, and it changes literally everything. So under the new Australian tax residency rules, if you spend 183 days or more in Australia in any tax year, you're automatically a tax resident. No exemptions, no arguments. This is the primary Australia Bright Line test, and it's designed to catch people who never intended to be Australian tax residents before. But here's where it gets really nasty, and that is a secondary test that will trap most people. If you spend between 45 and 182 days in Australia, you'll be subject to the Australia 45-day rural tax residency. And this means even a couple of short business trips or family visits could make you a tax resident potentially. So the new rules include what they call the factor test. And if you spend more than 45 days in Australia and meet two of these four factors, you're trapped as a tax resident, having the right to live permanently in Australia, having Australian accommodation available, having Australian family, or having Australian economic connections. So most Australians will automatically meet at least two of these factors now, which means the Australia 45-day rule tax residency become a 45-day trap. Now let's talk about Australian tax resident exit strategies under these new rules, because this is where most people will get caught. So the new Australian tax residency rules in 2026 create different exit rules depending on whether you're a short-term or long-term resident. And if you've been an Australian tax resident for 3 consecutive years or more, you are considered as a long-term resident. And the Australia 3-year tax exit requirement becomes brutal. As an Australian long-term resident tax exit, you'll need to spend fewer than 45 days in Australia for 3 consecutive years to break free. That's not 45 days per year, that's 45 days total.
Wow, that's crazy. So you can't even. So like, if you wanted to go live somewhere cheap overseas and then come back to Australia and see visit your parents or whatever, you could literally only do it for 45 days, which is a month and a half. So think about it, over three years, you're looking at 2 weeks, 2 weeks each year. So like obviously it's a very the new well, it's not, it's been around for a while, like the digital nomad type trend. And if you own a business, you can that you can run from another country, then it's financially responsible and beneficial for you to move to a cheaper country, in particular in Southeast Asia, work there, live there, and then come back to Australia for, if you need to, business, or to visit family. But with only 45 days like allowed over 3 years, that's that makes it very hard for a lot of people.
Over 3 years. One extended family emergency or business trip could reset your entire exit clock immediately. But there's one exception: the Australian Overseas Employment Tax Rule. If you take up overseas employment for more than 2 years, have accommodation in this overseas country for the entire period, and spend less than 45 days in Australia each year, you can qualify for immediate non residency. But the problem is that most modern employment arrangements don't meet these strict criteria. Remote work, consulting arrangements, or employment with related entities don't qualify.
So pretty much you need to get a real job in in like brackets, I
So
guess
this
you
is
could
why
call it.
smart Australians are implementing their Australian tax resident exit strategies right now, before these rules take effect in July 2026. So let me tell you about Australia making it harder to leave through a real example. Under the current rules, I helped an Australian entrepreneur move to Dubai. He kept his Australian property, maintained some business connections, and visited Australia for about 60 days per year. He successfully became a non-resident for tax purposes. And under the new rules, what would be happening? He'd be trapped. The 60 days exceeds the 45-day threshold, and he has Australian accommodation and he has Australian economic interests. So he'd meet for the factor test and remain a tax resident despite living in Dubai. So this is exactly what the Australian tax trap in 2026 is designed to do: catch people who previously could legitimately claim non-residency. And the numbers are staggering. Currently, many Australians living overseas legitimately claim non-residency. Under the new rules, expert estimates that 60 to 70% of these people will be
That's crazy. When you like the government's already trying to take so much money from people that actually live in Australia and work in Australia, but now they got to fucking go ahead and try and take money from people that have they've done well for themselves, and they've been able to escape the rat race, go live overseas while working, potentially doing online stuff, and now they're going to have to pay Australian taxes, and most likely taxes in the country that they're living in. So basically, what this does is draw you back into Australia permanently. It traps you in Australia. It stops you from, you know, yeah, I guess you can call it tax evasion or dodging the tax system. But at the end of the day, you're sacrificing something in your life to go live overseas. So that's the sacrifice that these people are willing to make, and but yet they're still getting captured by this new tax regime.
classified as tax residents. Now, let's talk about the solution that's working for our clients: moving from Australia to the UAE before these rules take literally effect. So the UAE offers one of the most tax efficient destinations for Australian expats. And here's why it works so well for Australian tax resident exit strategies. First, the UAE has no personal income tax, which means you can earn a substantial income without any UAE tax obligations. Second, the UAE recently introduced clear tax residency rules that made it easier to establish genuine tax residency there. So you can become a UAE tax resident by spending 183 days in the UAE in the last 12 months period, or 90 days if you're a UAE resident with a permanent place of residence or employment. And this creates a perfect strategy for leaving Australia for UAE tax benefits. So you can establish clear UAE tax residency while minimizing your days in Australia to break free from the Australian prison. But this is important: you need to execute this strategy before the new rules take effect. Once the Australia Bright Line test becomes law, your options become severely limited. Let me walk you through how to become a UAE tax resident while implementing Australia's setup. So this cycle that this is, I can promise you that the Australian tax residency is determined by the totality of your circumstances. So it's not enough to just move to the UAE. You need to create a pattern of life that clearly demonstrates you've made the UAE your real home. So this means closing Australian bank accounts, selling Australian property that's not generating income, ending Australian business activities, and creating genuine economic substance here in the UAE. So the UAE makes this relatively straightforward because of its business-friendly environment, of course, and also clear tax residency rules. You can establish a legitimate business, create genuine economic activity, and build a real strategies on
It's pretty crazy how much Australians are getting screwed over here. Let's go over the comments. Left Australia 10 years ago, saw this coming. Good luck, everybody. Australia was so good in the 70s and 80s. It was the best country in the world. Then Sydney was incredible. People got on great, so affordable for everyone. It was safe, and now it's unbelievably unaffordable. Crime, drugs, new norm, absolutely shameful. And yeah, it's only getting worse. So a lot of people are probably going to start waking up to the fact that potentially Australia isn't what they want it to be anymore. And obviously, when Australia is trying to tax the shit out of people that are trying to leave, um, they're trying to, keep as many people in this country as they want. And it's a shame that you can't, obviously Australia is a pretty beautiful place, and you can't keep like a personal property that you maybe like Airbnb. Possibly you can. I'm not sure, but potentially, by the sounds of it, you might not be able to keep that, as it might affect your tax residency, and so you can't even come back to Australia on a holiday in your own like little vacation spot that you have. Wake up, the ATO is the biggest Australian scam. I'm a dual citizen. I decided to leave and go back. My Euro Australia is non-stop. Is not able to stop me and my money. Once I work and live in Europe again, Australia can't tax me anymore, as Australia has no legal power to tax EU citizens. Live and work in the EU. The EU doesn't sound that much better, though, I would say. Yeah. 15% of the super contributions was a trap. Well, here it is. Yeah, it's crazy. I'd love to hear what you guys think below. Honestly, it's it's a crazy time. Um, I would consider moving to another country just purely to save on tax and actually have a cost of living, um, a reasonable cost of living, like where you can actually afford your rent and food. That's not more than 50% of your budget. While here in Australia, it's pretty conservatively, it's over 50% of your budget just for food and rent. So it leaves not much for saving and investing and getting ahead. So it is a bad time to be Australian, and it doesn't look like it's going to be getting any better. I'd love to hear what you guys think below. And if you've watched this far into the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Later.